Thanks so much for helping me plan my analysis for my dissertation work.
It's no problem. Tell me more about what you're planning on doing.
So, for my dissertation, I'm examining the effect of two different drugs on 5 different cytokines. Based on the literature, I plan to use the standard 0.05 as the level of significance when comparing treatment arms.
In theory, the type 1 error rate you choose should be based on the consequences of falsely rejecting a true null hypothesis. But it is also true that 5% is commonly accepted in the literature. If you have 3 groups and 5 outcomes, though, how do you want to handle multiple comparisons?
Do you mean the fact that we're testing multiple hypotheses in the same study because we have 2 different drugs?
That is correct. Also, having 5 different cytokines may also be considered separate hypotheses.
I thought you were always supposed to correct for multiple comparisons because the more hypotheses that I test, the more likely I am to commit a type 1 error.
Well, there is a lot of discussion about whether you should correct for multiple comparisons, and if you do, how you should do it. In particular, it depends on what is worse, rejecting null hypotheses that are true or failing to reject null hypotheses that are false.
Interesting. So, what do you think I should do?
That will ultimately be up to you. In your case, you can think of it several ways. For a single comparison, you have the 5% chance of a false positive that you mentioned. But within an outcome measurement, you have 3 pairwise comparisons: drug A versus drug B, drug A versus control, and drug B versus control. And you do that across the whole experiment for 5 outcomes for a total of 15 comparisons you are testing.
Oh, I didn't think of it as being so many.
Assuming the null is true for each of these hypotheses, then each one of those hypotheses has a 5% chance of being a type 1 error. If we further assumed, for simplicity, that all 15 tests were independent, over the 15 comparisons, the probability you get at least one type 1 error is over 50%.
Oh, that's pretty high.
Exactly. The probability of making at least one type 1 error within a family of hypotheses is called the family-wise error rate. These multiple tests lead to an inflated type 1 error rate within a family of hypotheses unless a multiple comparison correction is used.
So, all of my hypotheses related to inflammation make up one family?
You can define families of hypotheses different ways. You could include every comparison in the study as a family, or you could say that only the comparisons within an outcome make up a family.
Okay, so if I defined a family as comparisons within an outcome, I can control the family wise error rate for those 3 comparisons. But that still wouldn't fully control for the probability of finding type 1 errors across all outcomes.
Yes, in fact, that is a common way people handle multiple comparisons, whether they realize it or not. When you choose a multiple comparison procedure in statistical software, it usually defines a family as only comparisons within a single outcome because we usually calculate statistics for each outcome separately.
I can see it making sense to define a family as within an outcome or even across similar outcomes. But what if I also wanted to add oxidative stress outcomes? There are 2 markers of oxidative stress that I'd like to examine also. So would this be a separate family of hypotheses?
Again, this would depend on your expert opinion. If cytokines and oxidative stress seem to be independent, then it might make sense for them to be separate families. Or even choosing the comparisons within individual outcomes may still be appropriate.
So, this decision seems to depend on many factors and also seems to be a little subjective. So, moving forward, I will work on defining families by considering how related the comparisons are, the consequences of a type 1 error, and the conventions in my field.
That sounds very reasonable. Regardless of the definition used for a family of hypotheses, it should be predefined and clearly described in your manuscripts. Another consequence of multiple comparison correction is that you need more sample size to retain the same power. Hence, plan your power and sample size calculations such that you maintain the overall family-wise error rate you choose.
Thank you so much. This has been very helpful. I'm glad we had this meeting before I started my experiment.
Sure, let me know how I can help you further.